Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Porter, Director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy, and we can see participants are entering our webinar room. So we'll give it a minute or two to make sure that people have a chance to be on deck before we get started with our discussion today. Welcome, everyone. Again, I'm Sarah Porter, Director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy at ASU's Morrison Institute for Public Policy. We're so honored today to have an outstanding panel of experts to talk about a landmark development in Arizona water policy, the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement. You'll have a chance to hear from people who've been directly involved in this important settlement agreement and hear what it means for the parties, for the tribes, for water users that share water in Northeastern Arizona, and for the state of Arizona as a whole. This webinar and a related explainer that you can find on the Kyle Center website with the exciting title, Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement Explainer, are supported in part by ASU's Arizona Water Innovation Initiative. And we're very grateful to have that support. Let me go ahead and introduce our panelists and then hand it over to our moderator. We'll start with I'm going to try to do this in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Patrick Adams. He is the governor's senior advisor on water policy. Next would be Thane Lowe, who is outside counsel for the Hopi tribe. We also have Crystal Tully Cordova, who is the principal hydrologist for the Navajo Nation, and Aaron Young, the Water Resources Manager for the City of Flagstaff. And then I'm very pleased to turn this discussion over to my colleague, Senior Research Fellow, Cora Tso. And I'm going to hand it over to Cora. Before I do that, I will also mention that we welcome your questions. Please put them in the Q&A, and I'll be checking the questions, trying to consolidate as possible so that I can help Cora and the panel get to as many of the questions that you pose as possible. Thank you very much, and I will now hand it over to Cora.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for your time. We're very excited to be able to have a discussion on this very important and historic water settlement. We're going to start by a few individual context-setting questions and then shift into a panel-wide discussion. But to start, I would love to hear from each party about your experience with the settlement. And to begin, Dr. Tully Cordova, could you please provide a brief history of the Navajo Nation's efforts to secure their water rights in Arizona?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. In 1985, the Navajo Nation filed its statement of claim in the Little Colorado River. In 1991, the Little Colorado River team was established to help settle the Navajo Nation's water rights. For over 3 decades, the Navajo Nation has been concurrently engaged in litigation and settlement efforts to resolve the Navajo Nation's water right claims in the Little Colorado River Basin, a tributary to the Colorado River. In 2003, the Navajo Nation filed suit against the United States, asserting the Colorado River management did not account for the Navajo Nation's unquantified water rights to the Colorado River main stem, and that the department breached its trust responsibility to the Navajo Nation by failing to help quantify Navajo Nation's Colorado River rights. The case stayed pending negotiations from 2003 to 2012. In 2003, a second federal negotiation team was established to address main stem Lower Colorado River water rights claims. And in 2008, parties reached an agreement in principle to settle the main stem, Lower Colorado River, and Little Colorado River claims. In 2011, Senator John Kyle informed the Navajo Nation, Hopi tribe, and parties that, quote, the settlement is, as currently configured, can't pass. He urged parties to separate into 2 or more settlements because of the cost of the 2008 settlement, which was approximately $800 million. On June 3rd, 2011, parties presented both a draft settlement agreement and proposed legislation to Senator John Kyle. On February 14, 2012, the Navajo Hopi Little Colorado River Water Rights Settlement Act of 2012 was introduced by Senators John Kyle and John McCain. On February 16, 2012, the legislation was introduced into the House by Representatives Quayle as well as Gosar. The Navajo Nation rejected the settlement because the bill contained provisions extending the lease and other agreements for the Navajo generating station. The Arizona versus Navajo Nation litigation, also known as the Navajo Nation breach of trust case, resumed and concluded with a Supreme Court of the United States decision in June 2023. In 2018, the Navajo Council requested to restart negotiations and submitted a settlement framework. In 2019, the Navajo generating station closed, freeing Upper Basin Colorado River water. In 2023, Navajo Nation Phase 1 hearings occurred for the Little Colorado River adjudication. In 2023 and 24, the Navajo Nation was engaged with 38 parties negotiating the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement, a comprehensive settlement including Upper Colorado River, Main Stem, Lower Colorado River, and Little Colorado River water rights claims. On May 23rd, the 25th Navajo Nation Council unanimously approved the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement. Less than 24 hours later, President Boo Nygren signed the legislation into law. On July 8, 2024, Senator Mark Kelly, together with co-sponsor Senator Kirsten Sinema, introduced Senate Bill 4633, the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Act of 2024. A companion House bill, H.R. 8940, was introduced by Representative Juan Ciscomani and co-sponsored by Representatives Greg Stanton, Raul Grijalva, and David Schweikert. The Navajo Nation is hopeful that this settlement can be passed this Congress.
Thank you so much for sharing that history. It's really important to put it into context of how much work has gone into getting here today and understanding that this isn't the first time that we've gotten this close. So if you could explain more, Thane, about the Hopi tribe's efforts to secure their water rights in Arizona, that'd be much appreciated.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today. And thanks to Dr. Tully Cordova for that detailed recitation of the history. A lot of the same applies to Hopi, at least in the context of the LCR adjudication and the settlement efforts. Since Dr. Tully Cordova has gone into that kind of detail, let me maybe take a high-level step back and say that from Hopi's perspective, this has been an effort that you might say goes back almost 200 years to Hopi's first contact with the European outsiders. The Hopi Reservation was established in 1882. Over time, it became completely surrounded by the Navajo Reservation. That's a very important context in terms of understanding Hopi's stake in this settlement. Hopi is completely surrounded by the Navajo Reservation. The Hopi Reservation is about 1.66 million acres. There are about 14,000 enrolled members of the Hopi tribe, approximately 9,000 of whom live on the Hopi Reservation. The Hopi are a Puebloan people. They live in villages. They're farmers. They've farmed in this area for thousands of years, they and their ancestors. and the villages on the Hopi Reservation are widely considered, if not the oldest, among the oldest continuously inhabited communities in the United States. The contact with and I want to be positive here. I think a huge takeaway, especially for people who are not familiar with Hopi and the Hopi Navajo relationship, it has been marked for a long time by conflict. This settlement is a huge, it's a monumental historical event in terms of the relationship of the two tribes. And seeing the reaction of folks who are familiar with the history of these two people, understanding what has necessarily gone into what we have accomplished, it's just been something that I think we all can be very, very proud of. And I would hope that that everybody appreciates and maybe even takes a little inspiration from this. Maybe a couple of things I'll add to what Dr. Tully Cordova said. There was an earlier settlement effort even before the mid-2000 efforts. The Peabody Mining Company had been farming water from a pristine ancient aquifer that sees very little recharge. It's really the only meaningful water resource under large portions of the Navajo and the Hopi reservations, the N aquifer. Peabody had been mining that aquifer for decades to slurry coal to a generating station in Nevada. And early settlement efforts focused on trying to terminate that use of the aquifer. And that was finally accomplished in 2005. But as Dr. Tully Cordova said, for other reasons, settlement wasn't accomplished at that time. What happened, I think, here and has enabled us to be successful in the end is people were finally ready. Not just Hopi and Navajo, but I think our non-Indian neighbors, tired of litigation. And this is a win-win for everybody in the state of Arizona, not just for the people of Northeastern Arizona. The certainty that this settlement will afford is going to be a huge benefit for the people of Central Arizona. It's going to make possible for Arizona and the Central Arizona Project to move forward in the post-2026 context. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know it's a disservice to the history of both these tribal nations as well as the San Juan Southern Paiute and how much effort and work has gone into getting here. But I think something that folks may not consider in these Indian water rights settlements is that the benefits to non-tribal communities are also impacted and affected in these settlement agreements. And Aaron, we're so appreciative of your presence here today and understand that Flagstaff is outside of the boundaries of both these reservations. Could you share the role that the city of Flagstaff has in this settlement agreement and why it was important for the city to be involved?
Yeah, Cora, thank you for inviting Flagstaff. This settlement, we're partners in Northeastern Arizona with the tribes. We've been part of the Coconino Plateau Watershed Partnership and working on water supply solutions for many, many years. We're very proud to support the settlement. But recognizing that we're not a tribal, the water supplies from which we rely are within the Little Colorado River watershed. With water rights remaining to be adjudicated in the LCR watershed, the settlement is our preferred path for settling water rights with the Navajo and the Hopi tribe and other parties, meaning this agreement ends years of costly, protracted litigation over surface water and groundwater rights claims across the region. It confirms water rights for not only the city of Flagstaff, but the other parties, city of Winslow, Barty Bar, among others. The settlement would put an end to or largely reduce future litigation and provides the parties with certainty for water management and community planning, at least through paper water rights. Another important reason we're involved is our groundwater is sourced from the regional Coconino Aquifer. This is an aquifer that is significant for most, if not all, who have signed the settlement.
Thank you so much for that context. And Patrick, we also wanted to get the perspective of the state. Could you please also give us a summary of the state's role in the settlement agreement and the significance of the Hobbs administration's prioritization of settling Indian water rights claims in Arizona?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Cora, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here on the panel with these amazing co-panelists who have spent a lot of time and effort and many, many years on moving this forward. I really appreciate that you asked about the governor's prioritization of tribal water rights claims and settling those claims, because that has really been the mandate that Governor Hobbs has given her staff, her team, her agencies across the executive branch in the state of Arizona. She has really pushed for all groups, all of our teams to be pushing to settle these and find resolution on these issues, which is, I think, one of the factors that have contributed to getting resolution in record time. Really, I want to start with, this is part of the governor's broader efforts to ensure that the state has a positive and a collaborative relationship with the sovereign nations of Arizona, the sovereign tribal nations of Arizona. And she's pushing for progress in that arena across many different fronts, not just water. I mean, we have an amazing director of tribal relations, Jason Chavez. He couldn't be here today. He's a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation. The governor has more than quadrupled the staff in the governor's office of tribal relations. The state has hired its first ever full-time tribal liaison at the Department of Water Resources, Donovan Carr, a member of the Navajo Nation. He's helping us with this critical work on water. And I just bring this up because, you know, this is really an all of government approach to engagement and collaboration with tribal nations in Arizona. And it's something that's a mindset and a view that's informing how we approach the policy on this. And that's about having tribal voices at the table, tribal voices that we are also informing us within our teams as well, and making sure that we are taking into account this long history and this myriad of policy issues that some of my co-panelists today have been discussing. So to your question about the state's role in water settlement negotiations, you know, one of the key roles that the state plays is often that of a convener in the negotiation space. So many of the all parties meetings are facilitated and held at DWR. And it's really a role where the state has an obligation and opportunity to move things forward and make sure that we're making progress and keeping up momentum. Another key aspect of the state's role in tribal water rights settlement negotiations is that the state is in a unique position because of the many different priorities that we have to balance. So the state is managing its groundwater resources. The state is managing its Colorado River entitlement, surface water supplies in the state of Arizona. There are state trust lands. There are water rights that are owned by various different state entities like the Game and Fish Department, the Department of Transportation, water rights that are pertinent to land, state trust lands. So all of these different aspects are within kind of the purview and the responsibility of the state to manage in the context of these tribal water rights settlement negotiations. And when it comes to changes in the law that can come from resolution of these settlements, that has an impact and a ripple effect across the state of Arizona and across all of our other different water supplies. So it's a very unique and interesting role that the state fills in these negotiations. But with all of these unique responsibilities and the interests and the role that the state plays, there's also really a great opportunity for the state to be a collaborator with the parties and to be driving solutions and be creative so that we can accomplish things like this settlement agreement. So really, as the state has stepped into this space in these negotiations under the Hobbs administration, again, it's really important to acknowledge the context of decades and decades of work. We've really tried to take a critical look at how can we be a partner in finding solutions? How can we be less of an adversary seeking to extract concessions and more of finding win-win opportunities in these settlement negotiations? And it's really resulted in some serious policy changes on behalf of the state and the way the states approach the negotiations, because we want to now we've been pulling in the same direction. And I think that's really helped contribute to the progress and speed at which we've seen this and other settlements move forward, in addition to just the tireless effort and dedication by the tribes and the other parties. So that's just a bit of an overview of how we approach these negotiations.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think your comments highlight the intricacy of these agreements and how much goes into finalizing even a proposed agreement. I know that for us, we're very familiar with all of those intricacies, but I think to the general public, something that I hear often in my work is just how do these things start and how do they choose what water resources and the difference between state land versus private and federal trust lands and tribal reservation lands. There's so many different questions, and but I know for some folks, when they think about what this settlement means for the state of Arizona, there's a number of different opinions. And one thing I'm curious to learn from all of you is what this settlement means for your community and your party. I know that that's a myriad of things, but if you could please just share from what hasn't already been expressed, what this agreement and this version of this agreement looks like for your community.
Thank you, Cora. I'll go ahead and start. 1 in 3 households on the Navajo Nation lack access to clean water. Clean water access challenges in the Navajo Nation exist for a number of reasons: a need for water infrastructure, aging water infrastructure, as well as water quality and water production challenges. The existing rural nature of Navajo communities makes it challenging for water haulers to access clean drinking water. In some cases, some families rely on unregulated water sources, such as livestock wells, for their water supply. Some livestock wells, according to research done at Northern Arizona University, have shown that the western side of the Navajo Nation had elevated levels of uranium and arsenic, higher than the maximum contaminant levels for drinking water. And an EPA reported that Navajo residents are at risk for kidney disease and cancer from exposure. But what this settlement, it really addresses these challenges. We would use the settlement funding to build regional water infrastructure, and the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement would secure $5 billion in funding to build substantial and much needed water delivery across the Northeastern Arizona region. And this would be projects for more than 50% of the 110 Navajo chapters. And it includes projects such as the Inapapa to Akatsi pipeline, the Southwest Navajo Regional Project, the Ganado Area Project, the Kotaker Lateral, the Black Mesa Project, the Four Corners Project, the Kayenta Project, the Lupton Project, and local groundwater projects. And in addition, the funding would help with renewable energy projects to power the delivery of water. And there's also inclusion of a Navajo Nation Agricultural Conservation Fund that benefits historical farming areas as well as ranching areas. And then there is inclusion of a Navajo Nation Operation Maintenance and Replacement Fund. And lastly, a Navajo Nation Lower Basin Colorado River Water Acquisition Fund. Thank you.
Hopi views the settlement as really providing a path forward for the Hopi people. There are no perennial streams on the Hopi reservation. There's no surface water to speak of. There is an aquifer, the N aquifer, but the recharge is estimated as little as 2,000 acre-feet a year. There's water there, but it won't last forever. The imported surface water supply that would come with the Navajo to Akatsi pipeline is going to be critical in terms of relieving pressure on the aquifer going forward. In addition, there are communities that currently have no water. Munkapi, adjacent to Tuba City, it is essentially out of water, cannot grow, and the settlement is going to provide not just the pipeline, but also near-term infrastructure, groundwater projects to get water to that and other communities similarly situated in the near term. Like Navajo, Hopi estimates that about 30%, though Hopi live in villages for the most part, approximately 30% of the Hopi residents of the reservation do not have running water in their homes. They rely on hauling water. So infrastructure, as Dr. Tully Cordova referred to on the Navajo reservation, it's just the same on Hopi. We need infrastructure, and the settlement is going to make that possible. Economic development, of course, you can't have economic development without water. It's been a major hindrance in the past to Hopi. The settlement is going to make that possible. And perhaps most important, well, two things related from Hopi's perspective, and I'm not Hopi, and I sort of hesitate to speak of this, but this is what Hopi highlights when they talk about this settlement. Hopi's a very conservative culture, and they very much, their worldview is framed around the idea that when they entered this world, they made a covenant with the original caretaker of this world, that they would remain at Hopi as stewards of that land. And it has been challenging, I think, for a lot of young people to live true to that covenant when many of the modern conveniences and economic development that we take for granted in the larger communities in Arizona has just been unavailable, largely because of the lack of infrastructure and water. But this settlement is going to make it possible for Hopis to remain at Hopi, for Hopis who've gone off to get educations or serve in the military to return home to Hopi and fulfill that covenant that they made with the Creator, to live at Hopi and be stewards of the land.
On to me, Cora.
Yes.
Flagstaff. So a focus of our water portfolio over the last many decades is building a resilient water supply portfolio, resilient to climate change and drought, wildfires. We've been impacted recently by wildfire to our some of our water resources, and building redundancy. Working through the Coconino Plateau Watershed Partnership with the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe have been part of that partnership. We were all together funding partners on the North Central Arizona Water Supply Feasibility Study. When that study was not funded, the parties took to pursuing our own water supply infrastructure options. The city had purchased Red Gap Ranch in 2005. We continue to investigate Red Gap Ranch. We've confirmed the water quality and quantity of groundwater. The ranch borders the Navajo Nation and Hopi tribal lands. It creates an opportunity as a regional water resource. So while this the settlement funding ask is largely for the tribes, infrastructure, on tribal lands, just on the other side of the border is this vetted regional solution. So for Flagstaff, with funds, we're not asking necessarily for funds be set aside, but maybe authorization from Congress to pursue a federal feasibility study. Red Gap really offers water quality benefits, economies of scale, opportunities for solar power generation, economic development along the I-40 corridor. So that's a kind of a focus for the Flagstaff community is perhaps an opportunity to partner. The other big success from the settlement is just that certainty of our surface water and groundwater claims. And for the audience, if that truly understanding what certainty of claims means to a community, I'll make a plug for the Kyle Center's Price of Uncertainty, the paper published in 2018, for how uncertainty was explained to impact the fictional town of Willowville. So for Flagstaff, we have lived with only claims to water rights for decades. And claims to water rights can be contested or trumped by more senior water rights once adjudicated. So there is potential for water claims to not be granted through the adjudication process, and therefore the wet water community has been relying on for decades is that risk of not being issued as a water right for that community or user. So we look forward to water rights claims being adjudicated, and the settlement is a wonderful opportunity.
Okay, I'll round us off here on what this settlement means for the state of Arizona. Well, first I want to start that this settlement agreement is evidence that even in a time period of scarcity and a time period of contentious issues, we can find serious solutions to water policy challenges. And I cannot express how complex it is, the policy, the legal nature of this settlement agreement is. And then to have that complexity spread across 39 competing entities with different perspectives on the issue. It is just unbelievable. And the fact that this settlement agreement is done is cause for immense optimism and immense excitement and celebration in the state of Arizona. So that is absolutely, I think, the first thing that we want to highlight in what this means. The settlement agreement means that is evidence that we don't have to do things the same way. We can change and we can improve. The state in the past could have been a better partner in getting these settlement negotiations resolved. There were policies in place when Governor Hobbs came in office, like the lands into trust policy in the state of Arizona, where the state would prohibit tribal nations from taking lands into trust as a condition of settling their water rights claims. And this was a really tough pill to swallow for many sovereign nations. And that was an area where the governor and her administration and we were able to come in and do away with policies like that, right? So it's evidence that we can improve and we can do better, and we can look and learn from the past and all the effort and work that's gone into these. The settlement is, as Dr. Tully Cordova and Thane mentioned, is critical for water justice, right? And making sure that people have access to clean, safe, reliable water in their homes. But also to Cora's point and what Aaron represents here on behalf of Flagstaff, it's water security for non-tribal parties as well. It's a win-win for everyone who's involved. And so, you know, when I think about this water rights settlement agreement for the state, it's really a monument to all of those things, to ushering in a new era of collaboration where the state has a relationship with the sovereign tribal nations of Arizona that's cooperative, that benefits all Arizonans. And I think, you know, the completion of these negotiations happened in a time frame that was really unheard of in our state's history. And that's because of the commitment that state leaders and these communities and tribal leaders had to work collaboratively and reach a common end goal. So for us, it's really all of these things and a cause for immense optimism and evidence of opportunities to enhance water justice, water security, and all of those areas.
Thank you all for sharing. I feel like we could have a dialogue on each one of your points and perspectives, and I really appreciate you highlighting them here today. I know personally for myself, growing up on the Navajo reservation in Shanto, I have heard of people experiencing those challenges firsthand, and traveling through the Hopi villages to Delcon, you see that as you're driving through the reservation there, and understanding the nuances of how much goes into the settlement is super critical, and we hope that we elevated that in a consumable way in our explainer, and really look forward to continuing that dialogue. I know that all of you have described how much thought and intention went into negotiating this agreement and making sure each party walked away with a benefit to their client, their community. And I think something that is critical for this settlement in particular that I've been hearing about in the community is the cost. And I know that there are so many factors that go into this negotiation, but could you describe what factors contributed to the substantial funding required for the settlement agreement, and how these financial commitments reflect the complexities of addressing those historical water infrastructure and access needs across Northeastern Arizona, not only for tribal communities, but non-tribal communities and non-tribal members who live within tribal reservations.
Building regional infrastructure is expensive. The Navajo Nation spans over 27,000 square miles across Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, and is similar in size to West Virginia. The Arizona side of the Navajo Nation has the greatest need for clean water access. Many of the Navajo chapters have more than 200 households that don't have access to clean water in their homes. And, you know, one of the other things that it's important to highlight is from 1944 to 1986, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from Navajo lands, and the U.S. EPA has mapped over 500 abandoned uranium mines on or near the boundaries of the Navajo Nation. And in 2011, Weston Solutions published a report for Claim 28 in the central portion of the Navajo Nation in the Blue Gap Tutsheet chapter region that describe, you know, drinking water sources were absorbed 4 miles within the mine were potentially, you know, water sources that people would rely upon. But I think, you know, when we think about the 63 Navajo chapters that will benefit from the Northeastern Arizona water rights settlement, is to be able to build these projects and to provide the bulk water supply to help close the clean water access gap for Navajo households. Existing groundwater is not reliable for future water supply, and in its not only its quality, but really limits its usability because of the uranium, arsenic, and brackish water challenges. And I don't know how many of you have seen a brackish water map. These are high total dissolved solids. And if you were to look at the state of Arizona, there are elevated levels of brackish water where the southwestern portion of the Navajo Nation is. Upper Colorado River water is of better water quality and is more sustainable, considering it is recharged more frequently with precipitation events during the water year. However, accessing Upper Colorado River water is costly as well. So it's just important to highlight those few points.
Yeah, and I would, I guess, point in terms of cost to a couple of other things. And number one, the historic underinvestment is just shameful. You know, at the Hopi trials in the Little Colorado River adjudication, evidence was presented that the infrastructure on the Hopi reservation compares unfavorably to third world conditions. This is investment by the United States of America, the Indian Health Service, that is, it's just a shame. And infrastructure is expensive, whether you're building infrastructure on or off a reservation, it's expensive. I would point out to the audience that this is a bipartisan effort. We have some very fiscally conservative members of Congress who are supportive of this settlement. I would echo what Chairman Cliff Bentz, representative from Oregon, said. He's the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee subcommittee on water, wildlife, and fisheries. He made the point that if we had settled some of these claims 20 years ago, it would have cost a lot less. And if we don't settle them today and we wait for another 10 or 15 or 20 years, it's going to cost a lot more. We all know what happened as a result of COVID, the inflation we've seen recently. The cost of the pipeline that we're talking about in this settlement has doubled. The estimated cost of this pipeline has doubled over the course of our discussions. Bureau of Reclamation's initial estimates of cost were approximately $800 million, and now post-COVID, they've shot up to 1.7. In any event, again, infrastructure is expensive. The longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be, and the needs on the reservations are enormous. Thanks.
And for Flagstaff, you know, we're a regional economic hub. I have friends from Navajo and Hopi come shop here and fill up with water at our standpipes. And water resiliency is very important to the region through Flagstaff. And while we're the funding for non-Indian communities is not a focus of the ask under the Settlement Act, we feel the settlement is an opportunity, as I kind of shared, for regional vetted off reservation projects to qualify for future federal funding. A key aspect of our long-term relationship with the regional stakeholders is a joint interest in economic development and improvements through regional project designs that mitigate issues with water quality, creating redundancies and sustainable supplies. We've been working on these projects for years and discussing them. The ranch, as I mentioned, we border the Navajo Nation and Hopi lands in an area where the access disparities are very apparent. So passing of the settlement, we look forward to then becoming partners in regional water solutions.
So just on the subject of funding, I think we kind of generally describe the settlement legislation as having a $5 billion price tag, and that sounds big. But to what Dr. Tully Cordova and the other panelists mentioned, water infrastructure is expensive, and that's just what it costs. And I'll try to put a plug in here for another Kyle Center paper, which is their explainer on the settlement agreement. And they mentioned that while that price tag does appear big, when you look at it on a pro rata or per beneficiary basis, it's not unreasonable or even as expensive as other settlements have been. And certainly I want to echo Thane's point that it will only get more expensive. But, you know, we've talked a lot about the certainty that the settlement provides for the 3 tribes and the many different water supplies and many different communities. But at the end of the day, we're trying to provide clean water to residents of these sovereign nations, folks who don't have current access to clean, safe drinking water in their homes today. And we're trying to provide water for a future and thriving economy for these tribal nations. And so if there isn't enough funding to accomplish that, then we're not achieving our goals here with this settlement. And that's really what it comes down to. And we need to be mindful of that. So, you know, and I guess just on a more technical note, the funding is completely appropriate. And it's also critical to remember that, you know, with the United States and Congress moving towards more fund-based settlements, right, where you get a lump sum up front, and that's what you get regardless of how the costs shake out in the end. We need to make sure that that's going to be sufficient on the front end, because we don't often get another bite at that apple. And that's why there's other parts of the settlement agreement and the legislation that are critical as well, right? The ability of the tribes to lease and have self-determination with regard to how they use some of these water supplies creates revenue sources and opportunities that are financial tools, right? So that can shore up cost overruns or other expenses, or the ever increasing expense of operations and maintenance once you have the infrastructure built. So I think the funding is a critical part of the settlement agreement and legislation, and it's integral to the success of what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I also wanted to highlight that something that I find very attractive about this settlement is that not only is it making up for the disparities that have lacked in history, but also it's looking toward the future and the ability to bring infrastructure projects home to Northeastern Arizona for our communities who need jobs, who want to bring that revenue back for their communities and their families is super important. And I'm very excited to see what the future looks like, not only for my home community, but Northeastern Arizona as a whole. We do have one more question, but I know we're coming up on the hour, and I do want to remind folks that we do have a Q&A function, and we do want to give some time to our participants to ask any questions, and Sarah will be selecting and asking the panel. So while that comes in, I hope that there are a few while we're talking. But again, while Sarah tees that up, I just wanted to say thank you so much for providing those different perspectives. And I also just wanted to highlight the point that Thane made of just this idea that for tribal members who have come from the reservation, we're always told to come back home. And the ability to come back home means that we need to have a safe and healthy environment to come back to, and water is a critical part of that. And so I really appreciate all of the work and hours that you and your parties and clients have put into this process. It's been very exciting to see it come to fruition, and we hope that we'll be celebrating much more here in a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you all for an excellent discussion so far. We have a few really good questions here, and I hope we can move through them. I'm not going to ask them in the order in which they were asked, because I think some can be answered more quickly. So let's start with a question of what is the approval that is required for the settlement to be finalized? And the question specifically asks legislative approval. Who wants to explain what approval is now required?
Crystal, do you want to take it? Or I can give it a try.
Either you or me. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, okay, so what we've had hearings in front of the House committee and in front of a Senate committee now. And what we need are markups of the legislation that's been introduced in the House and in the Senate. And then we need a vote in the Senate and in the House, or however they do things to pass laws, and we need the president to sign it. We've got our hearings. We worked very hard to get our hearings. Now we need our markups. And there are ongoing negotiations over suggested amendments to the proposed legislation.
And just to underline that, that's the United States Congress, but a number of bodies, including the Navajo Nation Council, the Hopi Tribes Council, that have already approved the agreement. So there are lots of levels of legislative approval required. There's another question, and maybe this is a good one for Crystal, and that is, how long will it take to implement the settlement as envisioned? I think the question is thinking through implementing not just the approval by Congress, but to build out the infrastructure to make sure that the water is being delivered as envisioned.
Taking the opportunity to be able to do the planning, the design, and the construction, we are at various levels of preparing for that. As an example, I mentioned the Southwest Navajo project. I mean, right now, there's infrastructure that we have up and planning work that we're doing. So, I mean, all of these projects are at various levels within the planning, design, and construction process, at least for the Navajo side. And so when we think about, having a start and end date the same across the board for all of these projects, they don't all start and end at the same time, because as I mentioned, we're already doing our work now to be able to prepare to integrate these projects.
Sarah, let me add that the legislation as currently drafted contemplates that the Inabapatuakatsi pipeline, it's a pipeline that would bring about 10,000 acre-feet of water from Lake Powell to Western Navajo, the Hopi Reservation, the San Juan Southern Paiute Reservation. Legislation contemplates that could be complete as early as 2040. But we acknowledge, and the legislation acknowledges that might slip. Dr. Tully Cordova is exactly right, though, with respect to the tribe's individual projects. They're in various stages. Hopi has one that's ready to go. We're very far along in the planning. We've actually already drilled the wells with Hopi's own money for a water project that's needed for the community of Moenkopi, but various stages of development.
There've been a couple of questions related to the upper basin. One question is whether there will be pushback from the upper basin related to the pipeline from Lake Powell. And the other question is pushback from the upper basin related to leasing, to provisions And I'll say there's another question. These are all excellent questions, but a question about the leasing provisions. So we have maybe a few words about what leasing is envisioned or permitted under the settlement, whether there will be pushback from the Upper Basin related to that leasing, and finally, any potential pushback from the Upper Basin related to the pipeline.
Crystal, why don't I lead?
Start.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to start with, you know, a current hurdle is resolving concerns from certain states that are located in the Upper Colorado River Basin. Their concerns are based on the authorizations under this settlement for water diversions and movement of water between states and basins. The Navajo Nation is engaged in conversations with those states and working diligently to address their issues and questions. Go ahead, Thane.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that our conversations, Hopi's and Navajo's conversations with the Upper Basin states, they've always been very clear. They're supportive of the settlement per se and of the pipeline from Lake Powell to get water to the reservations. I think that's not an issue. The question is one that Crystal alluded to, and also the questions allude to. It's a concern about you know, pending completion of that pipeline during the next 20 or however many years we're talking about, during which Hopi and Navajo aren't using that water, could we lease it into central Arizona? And it's that leasing from the Upper Basin into the Lower Basin that's presenting some issues. But discussions are ongoing, and I'm confident. I think my client is confident that we'll come to a mutually satisfactory resolution.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here, and you know, the nation and the Hopi tribe have been great at driving this forward and resolving some of these hurdles that we've seen pop up with respect to some of our neighbors in the Colorado River Basin. I think to put a finer point on that question about leasing, we alluded to its value as a revenue generating tool, which is very important, right? Because again, if we do not have sufficient funds for this settlement, we will not be achieving the goals of this settlement. You know, the state, there are many tribes in the state of Arizona who do currently lease and exchange and have the flexibility to direct their water supplies as they see fit. Earlier this year, the governor was at the Colorado River Indian Tribes Reservation in Parker, celebrating federal legislation to grant them that access as well, which they previously did not have access to. So I think we're moving in a direction where, out of respect for tribal sovereignty and self-determination of these tribal nations in Arizona, they should have the flexibility to utilize their water supplies as they see fit within Arizona, which these are Arizona water supplies. So again, it's the settlement agreement is ready in the state of Arizona, a monumental effort with all of these parties and just the intense amount of work that's gone into this. And so, you know, we are really thinking it's something that the state of Arizona and all Arizonans should really be banding together to support and continue to push forward through Congress, because it's ready. The time is now, and we need to overcome. We've overcome so many hurdles already, and we need to make sure we continue to overcome any of it still we find in our path.
Thank you. We're almost out of time for questions, but we have two questions that I think, or at least one that can be answered quickly, and that is, does the settlement or the proposed legislation in Congress related to the settlement contain authorizations for feasibility studies? I think this question came in when Aaron was mentioning the feasibility study up in the Northeastern Arizona.
The legislation, the markup of the legislation is going to provide for a feasibility level analysis of the pipeline. The United States, their concerns, the current estimate, $1.7 billion, may not be enough, and the tribes are going to be required to hold back some of our trust funds to cover cost overruns. So there will be that feasibility, but that's the only one.
Cora, do we have time for one more question, or is it time to wrap it up?
I feel like we can add in one more question. Something that I want to leave everybody with is just, what do you want people who are viewing this webinar to take away regarding NAWAR and what it means for Arizona and your communities? We can
The
just do a
Northeastern
quick roundtable.
Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement includes important tools for water management and will enable 3 tribes to develop the water infrastructure needed for their citizens to live better and healthier lives in their tribal homelands. And the Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement provides the needed authorization for water diversions and movement between states and basins. The settlement provides certainty for Northeastern Arizona and certainty for management of the Colorado River Basin. And, you know, with that, there will no longer be outstanding water claim by the Navajo Nation, the largest tribe in Arizona. The settlement will provide finality with decreed water rights, and the Northeastern Arizona Water Rights Settlement provides $5 billion funding to construct the water infrastructure needed to secure Northeastern Arizona water's future.
I just echo that. This is good for, it's not just good for the tribes, it's good for Arizona. It's good for the non-Indian communities in Northeastern Arizona in terms of certainty, in terms of and finality, being done with litigation, decades of litigation that have cost ranchers and small towns, taxpayers, way too much money. And Central Arizona, resolution of the single largest outstanding claim to the Colorado River, that of the Navajo Nation. It's going to be resolved here. That's going to benefit Arizona as a whole and Central Arizona going forward.
Beautifully stated. Those were my same takeaways, so I'll just echo what was just stated for Flagstaff and other non-Indian parties.
Yeah, Aaron, it's those comments and remarks really sum it up. This is a monumental achievement in the state of Arizona in its water history timeline. It's going to have a generational impact. It's evidence that there are water policy solutions that are win-wins for all parties, tribal communities, non-tribal communities, Northern Arizona, Central Arizona, the whole Colorado River Basin, right? Settling these claims, keeping us out of court for another few decades, right? Preventing more decades of being in court, I should say. And really, I want to continue to center here. There are Indigenous community members who are our neighbors in this state, and they're lacking access to clean, safe drinking water. And this settlement is a solution to that, right? Creates legal and policy certainty. It provides the funding for infrastructure. It provides those same things for non-tribal communities. It's been something the state has been working on that needed to be resolved for many decades. And we have the solution right here in front of us. And it is just an exciting opportunity, evidence that we can continue to make these strides. It's something that should be celebrated as we all continue to band together and work to push it across the finish line. So it's just a very exciting time and really a testament to all the hard work of the parties, the tribal nations, and everyone who's been involved in this today and over the years.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your thoughts and your time today. And of course, the generations of work that went into getting here today. I hope that we are, again, you're celebrating here in a few weeks. And just want to say that it's been a phenomenal time period to come into water law and policy as a young Native tribal policymaker and attorney, and to just be able to learn from you all. I know that you have spent so much time and effort to try to continue this work, and having the ability to research this here at the Kyle Center and with the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative has been just a phenomenal time. So we really appreciate your time and hope to support you any way we can. And thank you all who logged in today. We hope that this was a very informative conversation, and we'll be sharing the recording once it's ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle Center.
Thank you all.
And to others.
Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
everyone.